Sometimes family betrayal comes with a boarding pass and a smile. My name is Emilio Santos. I'm 29 years old and work as a marine equipment specialist for Tideline Industries. For the past 4 months, I'd been meticulously planning what I thought would be the perfect farewell gift for my parents, a luxurious 10-day Mexican adventure before I relocated to our company's new facility in Vancouver. We're talking about a dream vacation here. Oceanfront suites at the Grand Velas Riviera Maya, private cenote swimming excursions, helicopter tours over Chichen Itza, and exclusive tequila tastings in the hills of Jalisco. I'd even arranged for my mom to swim with whale sharks in Isla Mujeres, something she'd been talking about since watching a National Geographic documentary 3 years ago. The whole package cost me nearly 18,000 of my savings, but seeing my parents experience something extraordinary together before I moved across the continent, worth every penny, or so I thought. Picture this. It's 5:30 a.m. on departure day, and I'm sitting in their Phoenix driveway with the engine running, ready to drive Roberto and Marina Santos to Sky Harbor Airport for their dream vacation. Instead of my dad appearing with his camera and my mom clutching her new passport, out walks my cousin Diego, 31 years old, hasn't held steady employment in 2 years, and carrying a backpack like he's heading to some music festival. Behind him came my parents, looking everywhere except at me. "Change of plans, mijo," my mom announced through the passenger window, using that gentle tone she reserves for delivering devastating news. "Diego's been having such a hard time since the restaurant laid him off. We thought this trip might help him get back on his feet." I stared at my dad, waiting for him to explain how my carefully planned parent-son bonding experience had suddenly become Diego's emotional recovery retreat. Instead, Roberto just shrugged and started loading Diego's stuff into my trunk like this was the most natural thing in the world. That's when I realized my 18,000 gesture had just been handed to someone who'd spent the last 6 months playing video games in my aunt's garage. "You already changed the tickets?" I asked, watching Diego settle into what should have been my passenger seat with a grin that made my stomach turn. "Last week," my mom chirped, avoiding eye contact. The airline was very understanding when we explained Diego's situation. "You know how it is. Family takes care of family. Family takes care of family." The phrase hit me like a slap. What about the family member who'd spent 4 months researching Mexican resort reviews, calling tour operators, and learning basic Spanish phrases to make their trip perfect? What about the son who wanted to create lasting memories before moving 200 miles away? Diego stretched out in the front seat like he owned it. "Man, Emilio, thanks for setting this up. I've never been anywhere tropical before. This is going to be sick." He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through TikTok videos, completely oblivious to the tension radiating from me. My dad climbed into the back seat next to my mom. "You understand, right, son? Diego's been really depressed since losing that server job at Applebee's. Your tia Carmen is worried about him. Sometimes a change of scenery is exactly what someone needs to get their life back on track." A change of scenery. That's what my meticulously planned parent-child bonding trip had become. Therapy for my perpetually unemployed cousin who'd been between opportunities since the Obama administration. The drive to Sky Harbor was 45 minutes of torture. Diego narrated every Instagram story he scrolled past. My mom made nervous small talk about the weather in Cancun, and my dad sat silently, probably congratulating himself for being such a generous brother to Carmen. Nobody mentioned the months I'd spent planning this trip. Nobody acknowledged that I'd wanted this time with them before my big move. Nobody seemed to care that they'd just handed my gift to someone who'd never given them anything but headaches and requests for gas money. As I pulled up to the departure terminal, watching other families say actual goodbyes to their traveling relatives, one thought kept echoing in my head. They'd made their choice, and it wasn't me. I didn't scream. I didn't slam on the brakes and demand they get out. I just sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching my breath fog up the windshield in the cool Phoenix morning air. "Thanks for the ride, cuz," Diego said, hopping out and stretching like he'd just woken up from the world's most comfortable nap. "I'll send you pics from the beach." Pictures from the beach I'd researched. Posts from the cenotes I'd booked. stories from the restaurants I'd reserved. My mom leaned over and kissed my cheek through the window. "We'll call you when we land, my Joe. Don't work too hard while we're gone." Don't work too hard. I'd been working overtime for months to afford this trip, picking up extra marine equipment inspections, skipping dinners out, driving my beat-up Honda instead of buying the truck I'd been wanting. Also, they could experience something amazing together. My dad gave me that awkward pat on the shoulder that he'd been using since I was 12. "Take care of yourself, Emilio. We'll see you when we get back." And then they walked away. My mom turned back once to wave, her new sun hat already perched perfectly on her head. Diego was already taking selfies with the airport in the background. My dad never looked back, wheeling his suitcase with the determined efficiency of a man who'd made peace with his decisions. I sat in that departure lane for 10 minutes, watching other families hug goodbye, watching couples check their boarding passes together, watching normal people do normal things. Airport security eventually knocked on my window and told me I had to move. The drive home was silent except for the radio playing some cheerful morning show host talking about weekend plans and dream vacations. I turned it off. Growing up, Diego had been the family's golden boy, the charming kid who could talk his way out of any trouble and make the adults laugh at every gathering. He'd played guitar at family parties, told jokes that had everyone in stitches, and somehow convinced every relative that his latest scheme was going to make him rich. But somewhere between high school graduation and his 25th birthday, the charm had curdled into manipulation. The guitar stayed in its case while Diego stayed on his mom's couch. The jokes became excuses for why he couldn't hold down jobs. The schemes became requests for loans he'd never repay. I'd watched this transformation happen in slow motion over family dinners and holiday gatherings. Diego would show up with stories about job interviews that went really well, but never seemed to result in actual employment. He'd talk about business ideas that needed just a little startup capital from family members. He'd charm my parents into believing that his latest failure was just bad luck, never bad choices. My parents ate it up every time. When Diego got evicted from his apartment 2 years ago, they helped Tia Carmen pay his deposit on a new place. When he totaled his car while driving uninsured, my dad spent a weekend helping him find a replacement on Craigslist. When Diego needed money for networking events and professional development courses, my mom would slip him cash and tell him not to mention it to me. I'd tried talking to them about it, gently at first, then more directly, as Diego's pattern became impossible to ignore. "He's figuring things out," my mom would say. "Everyone needs time to find their path." "He's your cousin," my dad would add. "We don't abandon family when they're struggling." Diego had been struggling and figuring things out for the better part of a decade, but pointing that out made me the bad guy, the successful one who didn't understand real hardship, the judgmental cousin who'd gotten lucky with a steady job and couldn't relate to Diego's journey. So I'd learned to keep my mouth shut and watch my parents enable his every bad decision while praising me for being responsible. But this was different. This wasn't just about money or empty bedrooms. This was about my gift, my planning, my attempt to create something meaningful before leaving Arizona, and they'd handed it to Diego, like it was just another favor for the family charity case. Let me paint you the full picture of what they'd just given away. This wasn't some last-minute Expedia deal I'd booked on a whim. I'd spent 4 months turning this trip into something extraordinary, something worthy of being my parents' first real vacation in over a decade. The Grand Velas Riviera Maya wasn't just a resort. It was a 5-star, adults-only paradise where every suite had an ocean view and a private terrace. I'd specifically chosen the ambassador-level rooms because my mom had mentioned once, years ago, that she'd always wanted to stay somewhere fancy enough to have a personal concierge. The nightly rate was $800 per room, and I'd booked them for 10 nights. But the accommodations were just the beginning. I'd arranged for them to swim with whale sharks off Isla Mujeres because my mom had been obsessed with marine life documentaries since retirement. The tour cost $400 per person and had a 6-month waiting list, but I'd called every operator in the Yucatan until I found availability. I'd even bought my mom an underwater camera specifically for the experience. For my dad, who'd spent 30 years teaching high school history, I'd booked a private archaeological tour of Chichen Itza with an actual Mayan cultural expert, not some resort guide reading from a script. 3 hours of in-depth historical context, followed by that helicopter ride over the pyramid at sunset. Roberto had taught about Mayan civilization for decades but never seen it firsthand. The cenote swimming excursion wasn't some touristy cattle call operation either. I'd found a local guide who took groups of only 4 people to hidden cenotes that most tourists never see. Crystal clear underground lakes surrounded by ancient stalactites, accessible only through jungle paths that required hiking boots and waterproof cameras. I'd researched restaurants for weeks, making reservations at places that showcased authentic Yucatecan cuisine rather than resort buffets, booked them cooking classes with local chefs, even arranged for them to visit a traditional tequila distillery in the hills outside Playa del Carmen, complete with private tastings and a master distiller who'd been crafting premium spirits for 40 years. The whole package had cost me 6 months of overtime pay, and every dollar I'd saved for my own Vancouver apartment deposit. But seeing my parents experience something magical together before I moved away, creating memories we could share for the rest of our lives, worth every sacrifice. Instead, they'd handed it to Diego, who'd probably spend the entire trip taking Instagram selfies and complaining about the Wi-Fi speed. I sat in my Honda Civic outside their house for over an hour after dropping them off, engine running, air conditioning blasting against the Arizona heat, staring at the empty driveway where Diego's broken-down Nissan usually sat leaking oil onto their concrete. The silence was deafening. No excited chatter about packing last-minute items. No double-checking of travel documents. No parents calling out reminders about watering plants or checking the mail. Just me, sitting alone in front of the house where I'd grown up, processing the fact that my gesture of love had been casually handed to someone who'd never worked for anything in his life. My phone buzzed. Text from my mom. At the gate. Diego is so excited. Thank you for being understanding, mijo. We'll send lots of pictures. KDA. Understanding. There was that word again. Like I'd participated in this decision. Like I'd nodded along when they announced they were giving my vacation to someone else. Like I'd cheerfully agreed that Diego's emotional well-being was more important than my attempt to bond with them before moving across the continent. I stared at that message for 10 minutes, thumb hovering over the keyboard, typing and deleting responses. What I wanted to write would have filled 3 paragraphs and included several words that would have made my Catholic grandmother spin in her grave. What I actually wrote was nothing. I deleted the text thread entirely. But I didn't drive home. Instead, I found myself opening my laptop on the passenger seat, connecting to their neighbor's unsecured Wi-Fi, and pulling up my email confirmations. Dozens of them. Hotel reservations, tour bookings, restaurant confirmations, transportation arrangements. Every detail of the trip I'd spent months perfecting, all laid out in digital format with convenient manage reservation links. Sitting there in that driveway, reading through itineraries that would now benefit someone who'd never appreciated anything he'd been given, something crystallized in my mind. My parents had made a choice. They'd chosen Diego's comfort over my effort. They'd valued his temporary happiness over the relationship I'd tried to honor. Fine. They could live with the consequences of that choice. I opened a new browser tab and started typing. If they wanted to prioritize Diego's needs, they were welcome to deal with everything that came with that decision. The beauty of digital reservations is how easy they are to modify. Every confirmation email had a manage booking link that required nothing more than a reservation number and the last name on the account. Santos. My last name. On my credit card. For my gift. I started with the hotel. The Grand Velas reservation system was surprisingly user-friendly. 2 clicks, and I was looking at their booking details. 2 ambassador suites, 10 nights, ocean view, concierge service included. The cancellation policy was clearly stated, full refund if canceled more than 48 hours before check-in. Since they'd just taken off from Phoenix and wouldn't arrive in Cancun until evening, I had plenty of time. Click. Reservation canceled. Refund processing within 3-5 business days. Next came the whale shark tour. That had been the hardest reservation to secure. requiring phone calls to 3 different operators and a 50% deposit paid months in advance. The cancellation was even easier than the hotel. Just a quick online form citing family emergency, full refund minus a 50 processing fee. The private archaeological tour of Chichen Itza, canceled. The cenote swimming excursion, canceled. The helicopter sunset tour, canceled. The cooking classes, canceled. The tequila distillery visit, canceled. Every restaurant reservation from the trendy rooftop place overlooking Cozumel to the hidden local spot that only seated 12 people per night, all canceled. With each click, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. This was too calculated for anger. More like clarity. For the first time in years, I was taking action instead of just accepting whatever my family decided was best for everyone except me. But I wasn't finished. I opened a new browser window and navigated to the U.S. State Department's website, specifically their section on international travel advisories. Mexico had been having some issues with tourism safety in certain regions lately. Nothing serious, but enough to warrant official documentation. I found exactly what I was looking for. A recent advisory about increased crime in popular tourist areas, with specific mentions of Cancun and the Riviera Maya. I crafted a careful email to the Mexican tourism authorities, expressing concern about Diego Morales, a U.S. citizen with a history of substance abuse issues who might be traveling to vulnerable tourist areas. I mentioned his recent job loss, his pattern of irresponsible behavior, and suggested they might want to be aware of someone who could potentially become a problem for local law enforcement. Nothing false. Diego did have those DUI arrests from his early 20s. He had been fired from jobs for showing up drunk. And he had that outstanding warrant for unpaid court fines that he'd been joking about at Christmas, laughing about how the system was too slow to catch up with him. I attached Diego's full name, date of birth, and flight information, then sent the email at 2 p.m. Phoenix time, which would be early morning in Mexico City. Then I called Tideline Industries and asked if I could start my Vancouver position immediately instead of waiting until next month. They were thrilled. The new facility was ahead of schedule and could use my expertise right away. By sunset, I was booking my own flight to Canada, scheduled to leave in 3 days. My phone started ringing at 11 p.m. that night. International number. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to my dad's strained voice explaining that there had been complications at the Cancun airport. They pulled Diego aside at customs, he said, sounding exhausted. Something about background checks and security concerns. We've been sitting in this holding area for 4 hours while they ask him questions about some old legal issues. Your mom's beside herself. Can you call me back? I deleted the voicemail and went to bed. The next morning brought 6 missed calls and a string of increasingly frantic text messages. The hotel had no record of their reservation. The tour companies were claiming their bookings had been canceled. The rental car they'd expected was somehow unavailable. Diego was still tied up with Mexican immigration, and my parents were stranded at the airport with nowhere to go. My mom's texts got progressively more desperate throughout the day. Mijo, please call us back. We don't know what's happening. The hotel says our reservation was canceled yesterday. There must be some mistake. We're trying to find somewhere else to stay, but everything is booked or so expensive. Diego might have to fly back to Phoenix. They're saying there are problems with his background check. Your dad is trying to sort this out, but we need help. Please answer your phone. I was at Tideline Industries, cleaning out my office and transferring projects to my replacement, when my supervisor Janet asked if everything was okay. You seem distracted, she said. Family emergency? Family education, I replied, boxing up my maritime equipment manuals. By evening, the messages had taken on a different tone. Roberto, typically a man of few words, had left a 10-minute voicemail describing their situation in detail. They'd managed to find a room at an airport hotel that cost 3 times what they'd budgeted for the entire accommodation portion of their trip. Diego was being held overnight for additional questioning. All their planned activities were either canceled or unavailable. My mom hadn't eaten anything since the airplane peanuts. I don't understand how this could happen, he said in the voicemail. All these reservations canceled at the same time. Diego having problems with immigration. It's like someone wanted this trip to fail. The last message came at midnight. Emilio, we know you're probably busy, but if you get this, please call us. We really need your help figuring this out. I put my phone on silent and continued packing for Vancouver. Diego showed up at my apartment 2 days later, looking like he'd been awake for 48 hours straight. His eyes were bloodshot, his clothes wrinkled, and he had that particular smell of someone who'd spent too much time in airport waiting areas. They sent me back, he said without preamble when I opened the door. I figured. Spent 36 hours in a detention room while they ran background checks and asked me about every stupid mistake I made in my 20s. Missed the whole first half of the vacation. He stepped closer, and I could see the anger building behind his exhaustion. Funny thing, though, one of the immigration officers mentioned that someone had contacted them about me, sent them detailed information about my background, my legal problems, even my flight information. I leaned against my doorframe, saying nothing. Real specific information, Emilio. The kind only family would know. Like about those DUI charges from 2018 that I mentioned at Christmas. Or that outstanding warrant for the unpaid court fines that I've been joking about. We stared at each other. Diego's hands were shaking slightly, whether from anger or caffeine withdrawal. I couldn't tell. You want to tell me why you sabotaged your own parents' vacation? It wasn't their vacation anymore. It was yours. They invited me. I didn't steal anything from you. No, you just moped around their house for months talking about how depressed you are until they felt guilty enough to give you something I'd spent 4 months planning. I straightened up, meeting his glare. Tell me, Diego, when was the last time you did something for Roberto and Marina? When was the last time you gave them anything besides problems to solve? His face flushed. Those people have been supporting you your whole life, paying for your college, helping with your car payments, bragging about your fancy job to everyone at family parties. And when they ask for one thing, taking care of family when family needs help, you throw a tantrum like a spoiled kid. Taking care of family? I laughed. Diego, you're 31 years old. You live in your mother's garage, you haven't held a steady job in 2 years, and you've been borrowing money from my parents since before I graduated college. When exactly do you plan to take care of them? I'm going through a rough patch. You've been going through a rough patch since the Bush administration. At what point does a rough patch become just who you are? Diego stepped back, jaw clenched like he was physically restraining himself from taking a swing at me. Your parents are good people, better than you deserve. You're absolutely right. They are good people, too good to see that you're using them, too generous to realize that you take everything and give nothing back. I met his stare without blinking. And too kind to understand that giving you my vacation wasn't helping you, it was enabling you. Diego turned and walked back to his borrowed car without another word. I watched him drive away, then went back inside to finish packing for Vancouver. Tomorrow, I'd be starting my new life in Canada. Tonight, I'd sleep better than I had in months. The call came at 7 a.m., just as I was loading my last suitcase into the Honda. Roberto's voice, flat and tired. Emilio, we need to talk. I'm heading to the airport, Dad. Flight to Vancouver leaves in 3 hours. Diego told us what you did. The immigration tip, canceling all our reservations. The whole thing. I stopped loading and straightened up, looking out at the Phoenix skyline one last time. What did I do? Don't play games with me, son. You sabotaged the trip. You made sure we'd have a miserable time because you were angry we brought Diego instead of you. I didn't sabotage anything. You made a choice. I just made sure you got exactly what you chose. Silence on the other end. I could picture him standing in their kitchen, probably staring out at Diego's car in their driveway, trying to figure out how this had become his problem to solve. Your mother hasn't stopped crying since we got back. She keeps asking what she did wrong, why you would hurt us like this. She didn't do anything wrong. Neither did you. You just prioritized Diego's feelings over my effort. That's a choice you're allowed to make, but choices have consequences. We were trying to help family. I am family too, Dad. The family member who spent 18-0 and 4 months creating something special for you. But that didn't matter when Diego needed cheering up. Another long pause. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. Are you saying this is our fault? These problems we had in Mexico? I'm saying that actions have consequences. You wanted to give my gift to someone who's never worked for anything in his life. You got to see what that actually looks like when things go wrong and there's no responsible person around to fix them. This doesn't sound like you, Emilio. You've never been vindictive. He was right. The old me would have swallowed my disappointment, smiled through their stories about Diego's Mexican adventure, and pretended everything was fine. The old me would have absorbed their decision as just another family situation I needed to accept gracefully. But something had broken that morning at Sky Harbor Airport, watching them walk away with Diego while I sat alone in the departure lane like an unpaid chauffeur. Maybe you don't know me as well as you think, I said. I have to go, Dad. My new job starts tomorrow. Tomorrow? But you weren't supposed to leave for another month. Plans change. Sometimes you have to put yourself first. I hung up and finished loading the car. Phoenix was already getting hot, even at 7 a.m., and I was looking forward to Vancouver's cooler weather and fresh start. My phone buzzed with more calls from my parents throughout the drive to the airport. I answered none of them. The flight to Vancouver was peaceful. 5 hours to think about family dynamics, personal boundaries, and the difference between helping people and enabling them. I read a book, dozed through the in-flight movie, and felt lighter with every mile that passed beneath us. When we landed in British Columbia, I turned on my phone to find 3 voicemails and a text from Roberto. Your mother says she understands why you're upset. Call when you're ready to talk. I put the phone away and focused on customs, baggage claim, and getting to my new apartment. Understanding was a start, but changing behavior was something else entirely. Either way, I was 200 miles away from their drama now, with a new job, a new city, and a chance to build relationships with people who appreciated effort instead of taking it for granted. 6 weeks into my Vancouver assignment, my phone rang during a coffee break. International number, but this time I answered. Emilio. My mom's voice, clearer than I'd heard it in months. How are you settling in? Good, Mom. Vancouver's beautiful. The job's going well. I'm glad. She paused. We need to tell you something important. I waited. We asked Diego to move out of Tia Carmen's garage, permanently this time. I nearly dropped my coffee. What happened? Your father found out he'd been using our credit card for online purchases. Over 2.0 worth of gaming equipment and clothes. When we confronted him about it, he said he'd pay us back from his next job. Her voice had an edge I'd never heard before. What next job? He hasn't even been looking. How did Dad react? He was furious. Not just about the money, but about the lying. Diego kept saying we were being unreasonable, that family should stick together during hard times. Then he brought up Mexico, said you'd turned us against him with your sabotage. She let out a long breath. That's when your father looked at him and said, maybe our son was trying to show us something we should have seen years ago. I walked to my office window looking out at the North Shore Mountains. Where's Diego now? Staying with some friend in Tempe, making it sound like we kicked him out for no reason. Posting on Facebook about how family abandons you when you need them most. She paused. We should have listened to you, Maijo. We should have seen what you saw. You were being kind, Mom. There's nothing wrong with wanting to help family. There's a difference between helping someone and letting them take advantage of you. We learned that the hard way in Mexico, sitting in that airport hotel room, watching Diego blame everyone except himself for his problems. What changed your mind? Really? Watching him in that immigration office, seeing how he handled the pressure. He didn't take responsibility for anything. Not the unpaid fines, not the pattern of job losses, not the fact that he'd been lying to us about looking for work. He just kept making excuses and expecting us to fix everything. Her voice grew stronger. Then we came home and saw how angry you were, how hurt. We realized that we'd been so focused on Diego's problems that we'd ignored our son who was actually trying to do something beautiful for us. Is Dad there? He wants to talk to you. Roberto's voice came on the line, gruff but warm. Emilio, I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything, Dad. Yes, I do. We took your gift and threw it away, treated your thoughtfulness like it didn't matter. You had every right to be angry. I wasn't angry, I was disappointed. Same result. We hurt you, and you showed us what that felt like. He cleared his throat. Are we going to be okay? I looked out at Vancouver's skyline, thinking about family loyalty, personal boundaries, and the difference between enabling and loving. We're okay, Dad. We're going to be fine. 8 months later, I flew back to Phoenix for Thanksgiving. Both my parents picked me up at Sky Harbor, standing at arrivals with genuine smiles and a welcome home sign Marina had made herself. The drive to their house felt different, lighter, more honest. They asked about my work in Vancouver, about the city, about whether I was dating anyone. No mention of Diego until I brought him up myself. How's he doing? I asked as we pulled into their driveway. Working construction again, Roberto said. Carmen says he's been reliable for about 3 months now, paying his own bills, staying in his own apartment. Think it'll stick this time? My parents exchanged a look. Maybe, my mom said. But that's his responsibility now, not ours. That evening, we sat in their living room looking through photo albums from family trips when I was younger. Holiday gatherings, birthday celebrations, summer vacations. Diego appeared in several of them, always smiling, always the center of attention. You know what we want to do? Marina said suddenly. What? Take that Mexico trip. The real one. The way you planned it. With you this time when you can get vacation from Vancouver. I thought about whale shark tours and cenote swimming, about sitting with my parents watching sunset from a Mayan pyramid, about sharing something beautiful instead of managing someone else's chaos. I'd like that, I said. But let's plan it together this time. All 3 of us. Deal, Roberto said. Later that night, I walked through their house, noticing the small changes. Diego's gaming setup was gone from the living room. The garage had been converted into my dad's workshop. The refrigerator no longer had a second lock on it. Small signs of a family learning to set boundaries. My phone buzzed with a text from my supervisor in Vancouver. How's Phoenix? I typed back. Exactly what I needed. The next morning, Marina was making breakfast when she looked up from her coffee and said, We're proud of you, Mijo, for standing up for yourself, for not letting us take advantage of your generosity. You weren't taking advantage. You were just being yourselves. Sometimes being yourself isn't enough. Sometimes you need someone you love to show you who you could be instead. She smiled. Thank you for loving us enough to do that. As I sat there eating my mom's famous breakfast burritos, watching my parents plan our future Mexico trip together, I realized something important. The best gift you can give people isn't always what they want. Sometimes it's showing them what they're worth fighting for. And sometimes, just sometimes, they're strong enough to fight for it themselves.